Welcome, everybody. Today's episode is very important to our life, to our healing, because we go deep into trauma. How to overcome trauma, how to heal from trauma, what trauma really is, and how we can manage our lives successfully, freely, joyfully, even if we're still in the process of healing trauma. Hi, and welcome to the Feminine Podcast, your weekly source of feminine guidance and inspiration. I'm Wana Stojanovic, founder of The Feminine, transformational coach, and a rite of passage facilitator. Here at The Feminine Podcast, we view every woman's life as a canvas, each stroke filled with stories that shape and empower you. Join me in this unique journey as we explore the rich tapestry of emotions, passions, and profound questions that we encounter on the feminine path. This isn't just a podcast. It is a sacred space where your voice matters, where healing and inspiration unite. Where a community of curious, powerful, and passionate women come together to trailblaze what it means to be a woman in today's world. Are you ready to embrace a feminine embodied life? Look no further. You've found your sanctuary. So, let's begin. I think we need to first connect with more the grounded information around trauma. What is trauma actually and how it functions and works? We talk a lot about trauma, but there's still a lot of misconceptions and confusion when we address trauma. So trauma is an incident that psychologically was overwhelming for us the moment it happened. A situation happened to us and we didn't have psychological, emotional resources to cope with it. Most of the times we were left unattended, unseen, alone, and we couldn't process it in real time. That's very important because we're going to talk about how to heal trauma. And healing trauma actually has a lot to do with the ability to process a negative situation, an overwhelming incident in real lifetime. Trauma can happen in a moment. It can be a situation in a moment that shocks us emotionally and psychologically. Most of the times trauma happens when we are very little and our psychological internal resources are still frail and we don't have enough coping mechanisms, psychologically speaking, to deal with that situation on an emotional level. So we're left totally vulnerable, totally in the wind, being blown up, right? Most of the times because when an incident happens, we're either alone or our caretakers, our parents, are not emotionally plugged in and connected to us, and they don't support us psychologically and emotionally to deal with it, express how we feel, and really process that set of emotions in real lifetime. Most of the time, trauma can happen in the belly of the mother because we are plugged into what the psyche of the mother and we're taking in everything she's absorbing. So if she's carrying trauma and she's not processing it, there are big chances we're taking in the load, right? So that's where transgenerational work and healing transgenerational trauma kicks in. Trauma can also be insidious. It can be a toxic dynamic that happens over a long period of time where your parents fight or you get bullied or, you even have emotional or physical violence in your household for such a long time, on and on and on and on, with no support, not being seen in the process, not being helped, that it becomes a trauma. So trauma can happen in a short incident or over a period of time, and it scars us, right? But we need to understand how and why. So why it scars us is because we don't process it. We don't do it in real lifetime. We don't talk to anybody in a safe environment about what has been happening to us that was overwhelming, dramatic, stirred us up, triggered us fully. If we would have this support structure created inside of our life, in our day-to-day life, then we would be less traumatized. And I'm going to give you an example of animals. Animals in the jungle do experience trauma because in the jungle, a lot of things happen, right? Including being threatened with, dying. Your life is threatened by another animal. And you may be injured, you may go through a traumatic incident or situation where you are alone and it's overwhelming for you as an animal, right? But what happens with animals is that the moment the incident ends and they get away, they still survive, animals stop and shake trauma off. Okay, they shake it, basically. What does that mean? They process on an instinctual, psychic, if you want, level, but their psyche is not that developed, right? Animals are more instinctual creatures, less complex than humans. They shake it off, right? And they can shiver and shake for tremendous amounts of minutes or even hours until they get rid of that shocking emotion from the body. Because an emotion is a stuck energy. It's much more intense energy gathered in one single point of focus. That's what emotions are. It's really contracted energy, right? Actually, out of this research, somebody actually created a very powerful technique to help people heal from trauma. It's called trauma release exercise, TRE. And this was done by a psychologist who was working with soldiers, trying to support soldiers after war to deal with their post-traumatic stress, which is, in itself a trauma. It's like a response to trauma that never ends, and you get very easily triggered, even if you're like literally, out of the war, out of a traumatic incident, you're still reliving trauma and you're still dealing with the shock of trauma in your psyche, in your body. So this guy actually invented this method, watching animals, and it's very powerful. The whole method is about shaking trauma off in an assisted way, facilitated by somebody. So it's a whole process. So what do we learn from this? That we need to shake it off. We need to process it. Of course, as human beings, we're much more complex than animals. That means that we just don't rely on shaking to deal with trauma. That would be a very simple and easygoing way to heal trauma. Unfortunately, it helps, but you can't rely only on that. You need to have a set of complex dynamics and processes and techniques to deal with trauma. But one of the reasons why trauma sticks around and has such a huge impact on our present life, right, on the effectiveness with which we carry our life, is because we don't process it, okay? We avoid it. We don't process it, we avoid it. And that's where addiction kicks in, bad behaviors, avoiding everything we want in our lives, because we're running away from trauma. Unfortunately, trauma doesn't go away no matter how much you run away from it, okay? On the contrary, the more you run away, eventually it catches up with you. And there's a moment where running away won't bail you out. It's just gonna build this momentum until you have to deal with yourself. You have to deal with that traumatic incident. But you can get away for many years with avoiding, right? Which happens to a lot of people. Why? Because trauma is pain. And who wants to live pain? Who wants to relive pain? The whole idea of us suppressing the traumatic incident, which is what happens in a trauma, and I'm going to explain in a second, is to avoid the pain. So why trauma sticks with us is because we don't process it. We don't talk about it. We don't release that overwhelming grip of pain that happened to us and the shock, the psychological, psychic shock of that incident on us. And what happens with trauma is that the moment the incident happens, even if it happens over a long period of time, so it's a re-traumatic experience time and time again in a loop, or it happens one time, our psyche splits in three parts. There's the part in our psyche that takes the load, deals with the shock, deals with the pain, and gets stuck and buried in our deep psyche. And we call that an inner child aspect, okay? Why? Because one, the subconscious is the inner child, and second, because this part of us is primitive. It's like a child. And the only way we're going to deal with it is imagining it's a child and talking to it like it's a child. It's an aspect of our inner child. Every trauma incident that happens to us splits the psyche in three parts. One aspect of these three parts, right, will become an aspect of your inner child. And that's very important because in another episode, actually the one coming next week, we're going to talk about how to heal from trauma. And this conversation is very important because how to heal from trauma is very deeply ingrained and connected to our inner child. So the part who takes the load, the part who takes the pain, is an inner child aspect of us who's going to suppress the incident and deeply cover itself in this deep psyche and stays there until we're ready to look at the pain. Another aspect of the psyche is our personality aspect. And this part in our psyche says to us, we're never going to deal with this again. I'm going to make sure. It's the warrior part of us. It's what we decide in the moment we have to become in order to avoid pain from now on. And each one of us decides on something else. Some become smart people. Some become nice people, pleasing people. Some become rebels. Some become, obedient. Some become very creative, very energetic, very alive. We decide upon something that becomes a trait in our personality, that becomes our identity. And that is meant in our subconscious mind and in our reasoning to prevent us from experiencing trauma again. It's a protection mechanism, right? It's a self-defense mechanism that's built in to avoid the pain, to avoid not living the pain again. And then there's the third part, which is the healthy part. The part who gathers itself up from the floor and says, okay, shit happened to us, let's move on. We need to survive one way or the other. And we pull ourselves from the floor and we move on, we move forward, right? And it's the part in us that, finds ways, healthy ways to survive, to move on. Now, this is the difference between somebody who's experiencing trauma and somebody who's experiencing such a big trauma that it turns into a mental health problem. The healthy part in us, it's less than the wounded part. If we have still a strong, ingrained, healthy part, psychologically, psychically speaking, then we can function. And we will develop into, successful adults to some degree, whether in our personal life or in our professional life. And we will experience trauma and the side effects of trauma, but we will cope with it. And hopefully, if we really decide on healing it, we do the work and then more healing happens. And as more healing happens, the part in us that has been painfully inflicted by trauma becomes healthier and joins the healthy psychological part of us. And we become healthier and more plugged in and more connected and more effective and more happy and joyful and radiant and fulfilled in our life. Now, if the healthy part is very little in comparison to the wounded part and the self-defense mechanism processes and parts of our psyche, then we can experience serious mental health issues and imbalances, even mental disease, right? And that's how we kind of set up the tone and make this landmark between, healthy people to some degree or in a big degree who do experience trauma and mentally sick people. And that's very important for us to understand because we kind of talk about it like we are mentally ill without actually knowing what that actually implies. We are experiencing more than ever a huge percent, I don't know if more than 90% of people being traumatized. We are living in a society, and during our time, we're living with trauma more than we want to acknowledge, talk about it, or really understand. And, most of us are experiencing trauma. Most of us are living with traumatic events that still linger on, that still are not healed and unprocessed properly. And it affects our life. But it's of course it's a mental health problem. Of course it's it's connected to our mental health, but it's very different than being mentally sick. And why? Because, I've just explained it. Also, we need to understand that very clearly, because the way to heal it is very different, right? So now we're talking about trauma. We're talking about people who do have healthy psyche and have still experienced wounded, traumatic events in their life, and they want to become healthier. They want to be more effective. They want to have more joy and more fulfillment in their life. And actually, the solution to that is, unfortunately, being with the pain of the part in us that's been hiding in the deep psyche. So how do we heal from trauma? How do we deal with trauma? First, understanding that we do have a trauma and there's nothing for us to be ashamed of. That doesn't make us weak people or unfunctional people. It just tells us about our humanity, and it informs us about the things in our life that didn't happen the way we deserved it, the way we needed in different moments, and that we have to start looking at. And most of the times, this momentum of looking at your trauma builds up either when you're in deep failing mode, where, a lot of things happen and you can't process them anymore, and you're in this deep swamp and you can't pull yourself back. That's one way of starting the process of healing. Another scenario is when you become very successful and you start ticking all the boxes that you put in your mind and you defined success by when you were adolescent, younger, and you start ticking all these boxes and you're not happy. On the contrary, you're more miserable than ever. And then just this identity, this vision we hold for ourselves: when I tick all the boxes, I'll be happy, everything will be okay. And it doesn't work, right? And you start ticking all the boxes and you feel more shitty than ever. And you're like, what had just happened? I thought everything will be okay when I tick all the boxes. Well, it's not. Because ticking all the boxes has nothing to do with your mental health. It has everything to do with how much work you put in those boxes. But mental health is something that impacts your life, but needs to be dealt with clearly and with full attention as itself, right? And that's very, very important for us to understand. So trauma doesn't go away if you avoid it. Trauma doesn't go away if you literally, jump into the arms of your lover and you are devoted to this amazing passion you feel with your lover. Trauma doesn't go away if you spend all the hours at work trying to build up your successful career and be important in the world. Trauma doesn't go away if you have a child who will fill the void of your loneliness. On the contrary, trauma doesn't go away if you, spend time avoiding the pain by taking in alcohol, drugs, shopping, some sort of addiction, right? That makes you feel good in the moment. These are coping mechanisms, all of them. Your lover, food, shopping, drugs, your child, they're all coping mechanisms. They're a way to distract yourself from the pain, right? Or at least that's how we end up using this in our life, these aspects of our life. We end up using them as coping mechanisms. They shouldn't be coping mechanisms, but this is what happens when we don't look at the pain of our trauma, when we don't decide consciously to start the healing process. So trauma doesn't go away if you avoid it. So then what's next? Well, what's next is really understanding, one, that you have a trauma and there's nothing you have to be ashamed of. Second, that you have to start looking at it. Literally, you have to start looking at it. You have to understand how the nervous system works and what you can do to actually become more healthier mentally wise. When I say trauma doesn't go away, what actually happens is that part of our psyche that has taken the load, our inner child aspect, is hidden in the subconscious. But it does resurface from time to time when we get triggered by something outside of our mental space, in our reality, right? Physical reality, in the present tense, when we get triggered by something that reminds us of how we felt in that traumatic incident. So what happens in trauma is when the shock happens to us, when the incident happens to us, our brain splits in three, but also our brain creates neural pathways. It plugs in because of the intensity of the shock, the intensity of emotion. The intensity of the emotion makes the brain instantly create neural pathways that fire up hormones and chemistry that get fully ingrained in our brain and fully ingrained in our personality, and they carry the memory of that traumatic incident. Alice Armstrong, a very famous psychologist, wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and Levin and all the psychologists that are trauma specialized talk about the body keeping the score. The body keeps the score, but also the brain keeps the score, meaning that we don't run away. We can't run away from our trauma. It's fully embedded in our neural pathways inside of our brain and inside of our cells. So we live with it all the time. And when something in the environment, it can be a gesture of a loved one, it can be a word, it can be a mood or a vibe, it can be an emotion that happens that somebody else is carrying, doesn't process it and lingers in the air, you immediately pick it up and you get re-triggered. Why? Because that emotion, that word, that dynamic is making your brain do this association between that incident and how it felt in trauma. So the moment the brain picks up this association, it starts to relive the traumatic incident unconsciously. And you start feeling totally taken out of reality, out of the present moment, into something that feels bad or feels very negative or feels very intense. It can be loneliness, it can be depression, it can be a lack of hope, it can be, being totally wiped out, literally have no energy to pull yourself out of the bed. It can be, an intense anxiety or stress or huge anger that you can't control, where you're lashing out on everybody for no reason. It can be guilt or deep shame, right? It can be a negative or a set of negative, intense emotions that all of the sudden take over you. They are completely overwhelming, and you get stuck and you can't process them and you can't get rid of them. And you are a victim in that moment. And, the association has happened with something in the present, something in your reality, whether in your personal life or professional life. But if you look objectively of the situations that are happening, playing out in your life, they are not that pervasive. They're not that overwhelming. They're not that insidious. Yet you feel 10 times more, right? Or 100 or 1,000,000 times more. Trauma always does have this kind of desperation taste to it, where you're like, no progress. I can't get away from this. This is it. I'm a full victim forever. It feels endless. It feels like you are completely taken by it and you'll never recover and there's no hope for you. And that's very important. And then to feel and understand that's actually a trauma feeling. It's not the reality. It's not the truth, but it can feel like the truth. And then you dissociate to avoid the pain, meaning you're leaving your body, you're leaving your awareness. You just can't cope with it and you're like a numbed zombie walking through life. Or you start, avoiding it through whatever sort of dynamical addiction pattern you have going on. Food, lovers, sex, drugs, going out a lot with people so that you numb yourself. so on and so forth. We all have one or two or three more, coping mechanisms, intense work, all to get away from this, right? Unfortunately, that doesn't heal trauma. And then eventually you may come back from it, from that episode, from that trigger, but that doesn't heal trauma. And then another association happens and you're back into the same flow. So how do you overcome this? How do you calm your nervous system down when this association happens? Well, you need to understand how the nervous system functions. So if it has a neural pathway and a set of neural pathways that the brain has fired up again and again for the last 20, 30, 40 years, meaning it has worked, it has interpreted reality and the information that's coming consciously and unconsciously from the universe through these specific neural pathways. I'm stupid, I'm done, I'm going to show you, whatever. It has 3, 4 neural pathways. And what we don't understand is that most of the times when trauma has settled in, we're pretty much on automatic pilot. There's not a lot of aliveness happening with us. There's not a lot of conscious spiritual awareness moving through our brain and our body. So we pretty much have 3, 4 speeds to us. And we think we're smart, but smartness and intellectual accomplishments have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. There's a clear connection between being intellectually well-developed and spiritually awake. Spiritually awake, meaning you're in the body, you're present in the moment, you can distinguish the past and the future from the present. You are aware, spiritually speaking. You are aware of your body, you're aware of your psyche, you're aware of what's going on. You can feel into the information and the energy that's happening in the present moment. Being intellectually well-developed and well-educated and above average means that the part in you that has decided being smart or being creative is how you're going to cope and run away from pain is just very developed. Or you are gifted from nature as a very above average intellectual person and you use that in your coping mechanisms. But very highly educated people can be very intellectual and very well accomplished intellectually and still be dead people walking through life, not being plugged into the present moment, right? So having a huge intellect, you can even be a genius, has nothing to do with being present. One, because being intellectually well-developed is connected to a part of the brain in the mid-center of the brain. And whenever we go to school and we get very educated, we will develop the mid-center of the brain and we can be extremely accomplished there. We can have amazing neural pathways there, which is different from being spiritually awake. When we are spiritually awake, the part of the brain that gets fired up where we create neural pathways is the frontal lobe, the forehead. And where the third eye exists, where there's a deep connection with the pituitary and pineal gland. So there are two parts of the brain that are very different, that fire up differently. Being spiritually awake and being in the present and being plugged in and connected is very different than being above average, an intellectual person. Sorry, guys. For those of you who are counting that your smartness can help you, it doesn't. On the contrary, most of the times it actually backfires because you try to figure it out through the logical mind, and trauma doesn't heal in the reasoning. Your logical, intellectual capacity cannot heal trauma. Why? Very simply because trauma is an emotional response. Trauma happened through your emotions. It didn't happen because you were stupid or smart. So your stupidness or your smartness, they won't help you. On the contrary, if you're more smart, you're going to try to figure it out on your own, okay? But coming back to being spiritually awake. So basically, the moment trauma kicks in, we're pretty much on automatic pilot. And we're either firing our intellect, and our healthy part, trying to survive whatever has happened for us, and trying to move on and be healthy. We're firing neural pathways that are connecting us to I'm going to run away from pain. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to make sure that this never happens to us. So you're always being nice. You're always being smart. You're always being, I don't know, creative and energetic. And then it's the neural pathway of the trauma itself, which carried the pain. So you pretty much have 3 sets of neural pathways, and you keep running from one to another, okay? That doesn't make you that alive and that present and that spiritually awake. On the contrary, also because these neural pathways most of the time are built in and created in the lower part of the brain, right behind our back, where there's the fight, flight, and freeze aspect of our brain, the survival brain, right? So trauma happens in the survival brain. Most of us are either activated in the survival brain or in the creative brain, which is the midbrain. Very few of us can have an awakening without actually a spiritual practice in the frontal lobe of the brain. So that's very important to understand, because unless you distinguish that, you're not really going to be very effective in dealing with trauma, right? So when trauma kicks in, when another episode kicks in your present tense life, your neural pathways fire up in the survival brain, and you try to work with it in the creative brain, in the midbrain. You're trying to be smart, you're trying to be effective, you're trying to figure yourself out, but this is not how trauma unwinds. Okay, this is not going to help your brain stop that neural pathway, the fight and flight or freeze reaction to whatever triggered you. So you feel a victim and you feel powerless no matter how smart, energetic, pleasing you are, because these are not going to work. Your midbrain is not going to help you. You need to come from the frontal lobe of your brain to intervene in the survival brain, okay? And how you do that is through being present, connecting and plugging to your body, and breath. Breath, the one that's free, everybody has it in their portfolio, and you can use it 24/7 because you're already using it 24/7, and you don't have to pay anything for it, okay? But it cannot be just simple breathing, because if you are in trauma and trauma kicks in, your breath will look like this, right? That's not the breath we're talking about. We are talking about becoming aware and using breath like a sword that cuts the connection between the neural pathway and your hormonal and chemical discharge. Because whenever a neural pathway charges up and fires up because of an association in the present with something in the past, we're going to relive that traumatic event, but we're also going to feel it. Why? Because those neurons are going to fire the whole pattern. They're not just going to get activated because you're remembering something or you're making an association. No, they're going to fire the hormones, the chemical releases that are then going to plug into the information in your cells, right? And all of the sudden, your brain is going to fire through your spine. All of this information were in trauma again. And the cells in your body who are already have, saved this information in the center of the cell are going to relive it again. So you're not just making an association, you're fully back in your trauma incident. You're literally living it 100%. That's why you feel hopeless. Because in that moment, all of you is back in trauma. And you're going to feel exactly as hopeless you felt when you were 4. And that amazing, unfair, totally negative incident happened to you, whether you are aware of it or not, or remember it or not. How do you calm the nervous system down? Well, you start taking a break, and no matter how much you feel in the moment, like your trauma, you tell yourself, I'm not my trauma. Trauma happened to me, but I'm not my trauma. And then you breathe. You breathe from the belly, A very easy breath is you can inhale up to 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, hold the breath for 2 seconds or 3 seconds, and then come down, exhaling 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold the breath again for 2, 3 seconds, and do that on repeat for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, depending how intense it feels. That's one technique. It works every single time, and it's free of charge, okay? And it's actually the most powerful technique one can have to deal with trauma in the moment. It actually is one of the most powerful techniques to deal with trauma. That's one. Another one is you need to ground yourself. And this is where the feminine energy can be very resourceful and helpful in dealing with trauma, especially if you're a woman, because, grounding yourself is pulling the energy from the survival brain back into the body and making you plug into the earth energy, which is really living in the frequency of the present tense moment. The earth is present. The earth is ecstatic. The earth is joyful. After breathing, if you go into the space of your heart and you plug yourself from the space of your heart, the energetic space of your heart, through the feet into the earth, and you extend spiritual light roots into the earth, or you hug a tree, or you go outside and you look at nature, okay? And you sit in nature for as long as you need, then you're energetically replugging your connection with the earth through the magnetism of the earth, through our electromagnetic biofields, right? So what does that happen in your field? It slowly starts to teach your cells a different frequency. It distracts the attention of your cell from those biochemical neural pathway patterns into the energy of the earth, which is higher in frequency, much more calm, much more present, much more joyful. You need to direct the attention of your brain and of your cells, not of yourself, right? So the brain, which is the inner child this time, because it is the subconscious brain, and your cell need to be commanded and then guided into a different frequency, one that lives in the present moment. That's why the feminine practices are extremely supportive and helpful. One, because when you're not having a trauma incident, you can build up that knowingness, that experience of feeling the joy, ingrain it in the cells of your body and ingrain it in your psyche, and that creates different neural pathways in your brain. The practices help you fire new connections in your brain, because the brain has neuroplasticity. It has the ability to fire neural pathways until we die. That's why change can happen when you're in your hundreds or in your 90s. Age doesn't prevent us from transforming and changing, okay? Our brain has that capacity to fire and create new neural pathways, but we don't know what type of practice we should be engaging with to create new neural pathways, okay? For example, all spiritual practices create new neural pathways. Also learning languages, foreign languages, more than 1, 2, 3, that creates new neural pathways in the brain. Also piano, because it picks up and brings two hemispheres, practices, and activates the two hemispheres all in the same time. Okay, so these are type of practices that enable us to create new neural pathways, even in our 40s, 50s, 70s, 90s, 100s. Okay, that's very important, because in those trauma incidents that we relive, unless we have an important different pattern to switch our attention from the trauma to this new pattern, we are totally taken over by trauma. Okay, now with spiritual practices, it's much more helpful, because the spiritual practices, all of them usually build on a frequency that's positive: joy, peace, love, unconditional love, present moment, ecstatic energy. And those type of frequencies, most of the times, are strong, they're powerful, they're higher in vibration than our trauma. So if we've built up through spiritual practices new neural pathways, right, then we have internal resources we can rely on when trauma kicks in. And we're commanding, we're breathing, we're stopping that instinctual cycle between the brain hormones and chemistry and the body. We're stopping that with the breath, and then we are plugging in and connecting through spiritual practice to a different frequency, commanding our brain and our cells, pick this up, fire this neural pathway away, and then our hormones kick in and our chemistry kicks in. And if we have extended levels of practice build up, then this happens faster. We can get back to our present tense, joyful state of beingness that we've been practicing in between the trauma episodes faster, much more powerful, because we have those built-in neural pathways. Now, this is where the feminine, it's amazing, and it brings so much depth and so much easiness to healing trauma, because the feminine, being a frequency of joy, ecstasy, and being in the present, is the easiest and most graceful way for us to develop in our body, in our energy field, in the center of our cells, the energy of joy and being present. And these are high frequencies that actually heal trauma. Okay? Also, what happens when we have trauma is that we dissociate. In order to avoid the pain in our body, the pain in our psyche, we mentally escape to some sort of fantasy realm or to overthinking and reasoning. What the feminine practices do is they teach you to be in the body. They teach you to embody yourself. They teach you to become present inside of your body and feel through the body. So whenever trauma kicks in, if you have enough feminine practice build up inside of your psyche and your energy field and in the cells of your body, then you can come back into the body. The body always lives in the present tense, unless it's taken over by the trauma. So when you stop the trauma incident with breath, you then have to move into the body, because the body lives in the present tense. Especially if you do grounding practices, that also enhances and enables you to feel through the body the present tense, the present moment, and then you calm down. So those are very important techniques that can help you get out of a traumatic incident, but they also help you long-term to build up internal resources that will eventually make you more psychologically and psychically more powerful to start dealing with the pain of trauma. And we're going to start working with this concept on our next episode. So stay tuned for next week. All right. Now, I have some questions prepared that are very powerful. And if somebody wants to join me live with a question, you can definitely raise your hand and we'll take you up at the end of our questions. So our first question is, how do we heal our relationship of rejection and conflict with our mother? And is this the cause of the fertility and infertility? And let's deal with this. They're very powerful questions on today's episode. And I want to take it step by step. So how do we heal our relationship of rejection with our mother? Well, by becoming our own mothers. And that means healing the mother wound, okay? Healing the mother wound means really starting to understand that the part in us that felt rejection or abandonment or betrayal by our mother or our father, right? The process stays the same, whether it's the mother or the father, whether it's rejection or abandonment. The part in us that felt rejection from our parents, most of the times, for long periods of time, is the inner child part of us who took the load and is now hidden in our psyche and comes up to the surface from time to time, especially when we go visit our mother who keeps rejecting us, right? So the inner child part of us needs to be healed. And we wait for our mother to change her behavior, because us as adults, we eventually talk to our mother and say, why do you reject me? When we become adolescent or even young adults, we start having more power to confront our parents with their bad behaviors towards us. And we say, why are you doing this to me? I need this from you. You're not giving it to me. But then, we feel even more disappointed because our parents don't pick up the message and they're still not willing to change, right? And that's also one of the reasons, is because our parents are acting that way because of their traumas. The work for them to change is deeper than us giving them a simple feedback. That doesn't mean they don't love us, but the type of work that's implied to change a behavior, it's, much more than we think about it. So it's not that they don't love us, but they're not willing or ready to do the work, right? So we tell our parents what doesn't work, but they still don't change, right? So now we also have the disappointment of them not receiving us, not seeing us, and not seeing what we need from them and not giving it to us. All of these things are absorbed by the inner child aspect who took the load of the rejection. And whenever that part in us is playing out, it's like a child coming to surface, being in pain, feeling rejected, and wanting love. Okay? So now, as adults, we already know, because we tried, our parents are not going to give that love to us the way we need it. Okay? So who's going to do that? Because we keep waiting. We keep waiting in vain, right? And most of the times we say, oh, love never happened to me in my childhood. Maybe it will happen to me in my first marriage. Okay? Oh, the first marriage blew up because he wasn't ready and he couldn't and whatever. Maybe it's the second one. And that, is our hope in our adult life for this experience of rejection to change through romantic love, through our partner. Most of the times, 99% of the times, unfortunately, our lover, just like my mother, after the first 6 months of falling in love. Why? Well, because the hope and the pain and the rejection stay there, right? And we keep firing this message into the universe on an unconscious level, where we say, we're a wounded, rejected, unseen, hopeless child. And that's the love we have experienced. We can talk forever about love, but what love plays out to be in our life is exactly how my mother made me feel. So if my mother bullied me and rejected me, that's what love is for me. It doesn't mean I can even be a poet and write amazing poems about love, but what love will be for me as an individual, as a human being, and what I will attract in a loop until I change this behavior internally, is the bullying, critical nature, rejection-based nature of my mother. So I'm just going to talk amazingly beautiful about love and attract the same partner like my mother, and I will be hopeless and desperate and don't understand why am I still experiencing this? Because your inner child is the one who manifests everything. And your mother can't help you, because if she could, she would have done it already, okay? And your husband can't help you because, one, he's not your mother. He can't be a parent. His role is that of a lover. And second, because he doesn't know how to. And he can't. And that's okay. That's the same for the first husband, the second husband, the third husband, no matter how much you want to try. If your mother can't heal you and can't help you ease the load, if your husband can't help you ease the load, who will help you? You're stuck and you're doomed, right? Who will help you? Maybe your therapist will help you. No, wrong answer. The job of the therapist is to train you to help yourself. He won't help you. And if you project that healing qualities onto him and that power, you're going to stay a lot in therapy and spend a lot of money for no reason, because you're not going to heal. And second, you're not going to really experience release and peace of mind. Because why? Your therapist can't help you. can't heal you. Nobody can heal you. And I've done extensive work with trauma and extensive work with inner child for the last more than 12 years. It's my number one gift and expertise. And I always come back to saying to adults on and on and on and on again, guys, nobody can do this for you, okay? And I know you'll try everything else except becoming the parent you never had. I know you will be so creative in managing another technique and another strategy just to realize nobody's coming to save your ass. Nobody. You have to become the mother you never have. How do you do that? Well, we're going to talk more about it in our next episode, so come back and stay tuned. But basically, by learning that the healthy part in you, the part in you that's driving this conversation forward, the part in you that wants the healing, the part in you that's fed up with being ineffective and living in the past and being totally overwhelmed by trauma, the part in you that once more needs to become the parent you never had and needs to start learning how to bond with your inner child, okay? And learning how to bond and talk and communicate with the part in you that took the load, with the inner child that's suffering and experiencing the pain, is how you heal from trauma. When you talk about healing trauma, you basically talk about becoming the parent you never had and starting to look within, taking all the projection from your therapist, from your mother, from God, from your lover or lovers, and saying, nobody can heal me. Nobody. I have to do this work by myself. And I know people will avoid this forever because they don't want to deal with the pain. They want to give the pain away to somebody else. That's why we project the power onto somebody else. It's not that we are lazy, we just don't want to feel the pain. That's why we rather, marry again and spend 5 years hoping that guy can heal us, he can heal our loneliness or betrayal wound or our rejection wound, because we just don't want to feel the pain of the rejection that I felt as a child when my mother acted that way. I'd rather do anything and pay any amount of money than feel that pain. Why? Because that child was alone and he was frail and he was weak and he didn't have anybody and he was just a child, and that treatment was unfair and he didn't deserve it. And it breaks your heart to connect with that child, okay? It's unbearable. And most of the times you won't be able to do it alone. That's when the therapist kicks in, a good one. It kicks in because that's when you need a resource, an external resource who can help you out, stay with you shoulder to shoulder, grab you by the hand and say, no, you're not alone. You're never going to be alone. I'm going to take you by the hand and we're going to walk through this rejection together, okay? We're going to connect with this little girl and we're going to love her the way nobody else loved her, because that was unfair and she didn't deserve it. And there's nothing she has to do to win our love and our attention. But I'm by your side, shoulder to shoulder. I cannot be the mother this little girl needs. Why? Because you're going to end therapy eventually if I'm good. Hopefully. That's the point, to end it. And this little girl deserves an unconditional, loving mother for the rest of your lives, okay? You cannot give your power away to anybody else the moment you start the healing process. The whole power needs to be in your hands, because you have to promise this little girl you're going to see her and love her and understand her and be with her in ways nobody was for the rest of your lives. And you have to keep that promise. It cannot be a whoopee promise. It can't be superficial. It needs to be a commitment for life, because that little girl deserves it. That little girl is you. It's you showing up for yourself, telling yourself, you know what? I have my own back. I will love myself. I will make myself matter. regardless of whoever gets this new mood or not. And I'm gonna change this forever for me. And that's how you start the healing process. That's how you start dealing with the rejection. And then, you're gonna become the parent she never had. And that's a whole other chapter we're gonna talk in our next episode, so stay tuned. But basically, it's becoming the parent, taking on a conscious, committed relationship with this part of you who took the load, this part of you who kept feeling rejection and betrayal and disappointment and, not feeling loved. It's not you. It's a part of you. And when you learn to disidentify from it and learn that the healthy part needs to step up and become a parent towards this part of it, part of you that is the inner child, inner girl, that's when a lot of momentum happens in your healing process. And of course, it plays out in your fertility or infertility because, these wounds that we've experienced in our relationship with our mother or our father, but most of the times our mother, will play out in our femininity. One, because we build a mistrust in the mother energy, and second, because we're not nurtured. And whoever is not nurtured can experience infertility. Think of a plant, right? A plant that, doesn't get the nurturing, it's barren and then eventually dies. Literally, that's what happens to us when we are infertile. We're not nurtured properly, so we can't bloom. And, that plays out to our relationship with the feminine energy because most of us are living in a masculine environment, unplugged from the feminine. But it also is in conjunction with, psychologically and psychically speaking, the mother archetype. So if we have wounds with our mother, of course, this will play out in our femininity later on, right? Another good topic for another episode. And, that's actually one of the most important breakthroughs I had personally. And I'm going to share all about that and how I healed from my infertility and my mother wound, my trauma with my biological mother in a devoted episode because it will take a lot of time. Another question. My appearance is above average, and as a teenager, I felt I had to cover myself or withdraw from social gatherings to stay safe. I've never been assaulted in a physical way, but often men stared at me, and I felt dirty and became sad and lonely. So this is more playing out in your adolescence, right? And it's about connecting with the part in you that felt dirty, sad, and lonely because that's your inner adolescent. And if this part of you, if you're not dirty, this is just an aspect who took the load, who took the pain in that moment in your life and is reliving that experience, has fully taken that experience in and reliving it time and time and time and time again, then what do you think she needs? An amazing mother who could start bonding with her, making her feel safe, and then through communication in a specific way, start, dealing with her experience, her emotions. Okay, so it's about one, parenting, reparenting ourselves by stepping into this role of the mother we never had, whether it's the inner girl or the adolescent, whatever aspect of our childhood got wounded. We disentangle from it. I'm not my wound. Yes, the healthy part in me is not my wound. The healthy part in me steps into a motherly role. The healthy part in me starts engaging with the part in me that's wounded, that feels dirty and shame and guilt and, alone and sad, and starts bonding, making this part safe so that this part can open and start sharing with me all the pain. And as a parent, I'm taking that pain and I'm processing it with the aspect of me that's the inner child, the inner girl, the inner adolescent. And we're going to talk more in our next episode. But this is how you start, dealing effectively, all right? Effectively with trauma. You get out of a traumatic incident through breath and grounding and connecting to your physical body by even touching or hugging yourself. But you start healing your trauma and your pain whenever you disentangle from this part of you and start in the healthy part of you, stepping into the role of the mother, the role of the parent you never had. And you will learn to become a better parent than all the parent models you had around you. I know there's an unconscious fear for all of us, like, how will I be a better parent if I never had a good role model? But trust me, you will be a better parent, and your instincts will kick in, and I'm going to guide you all the way through inside of this process, and you can be an amazing mother even if you didn't have a role model. That's how I would deal with this. How do I overcome my fear to explore new opportunities in my career? How do I get out of my cocoon? And I think this is a powerful question and a little bit different than all the other questions, because this is, I think, how you need to deal with healing trauma and picking up a developmental process, a coaching process. It is a combination of healing trauma and coaching yourself. One, because the cocoon is the trauma. So you're isolating yourself in a bubble because the outer world feels threatening. That's a sign of trauma. That's a defense mechanism. Being in your bubble, being in your cocoon, is a way in which you protect yourself unconsciously. What would happen to you if you get out of the cocoon? Life is dangerous. What would happen to you if you get out of the cocoon? This is a decision you made in a moment of trauma. And sitting in your cocoon is a way for you to protect yourself, right? And you need to start connecting with your inner girl and start understanding, why does she stay in the cocoon? What does she feel that makes staying in the cocoon valid? Why does she stay there? She stays there for a reason, and you need to find out that reason by learning to talk to her and bond with her and connect with her. So that's one. And the second is, you need to understand that your adult self, the healthy part of you, is influenced by the trauma of your inner girl, by the fear of stepping out of the cocoon, but it's also influenced by just being afraid, right? To venture into risky new opportunities and territories and fail. So you need to coach the part of you that's in the present, that's the healthy adult, that the only way to overcome fear is by being afraid and taking action anyway. So this is a combination of coaching and healing, because on one hand, you want to start connect through the healing process with your inner girl and start understanding more how she feels, why she feels the way she feels, and what does she need from you as a mother. And then it's also about you training yourself as an adult to venture into new territories. And even if you fail 100 times, it's part of the game. And become resilient with risking and failing and trying new things and figuring out that through the trials, you become a winner. You don't become a winner by sitting in your cocoon, and you don't become a winner by taking one chance and hopefully it's going to play out 100%. That never happens in real lifetime. In real lifetime, you fail a lot. And through the failing, you learn. And then through the learning, you become a winner, right? So, winning is a combination of mindset, work, and failing a lot, okay? So the mindset has to do with you healing from trauma, but then it's also about working, exposing yourself, risking, and learning to become free with failing, so that the more you experience, the more you put on effort into that, the more chances of winning you have. All right, so those are the questions for today's episode, and we're going to wrap this up for now. Great. So on our next episode, we're going to talk about how to go deeper into healing and how to learn to connect and bond with our inner girl, how to step into becoming the mothers we never had. So stay tuned. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for being here, and make sure you share and spread the magic of our live sessions with a sister, a friend, a mother, a daughter, a boss, an employee in your life, so that as many women hear about us and join our sacred circle, we get to impact the world. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to see you next week. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Feminine Podcast. Next week, we'll dive into another engaging topic chosen by you. our listeners. Have a question or a story to share? Check the description box below and send it our way. And before you go, hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on our next episode. Follow us, leave us a comment, and make sure you share this with the women in your life. Remember, every episode is a step closer to discovering your feminine potential and how you can create a life that you truly love. Catch you next week.